Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Talking City podcast, another edition of the Talking City podcast. We're absolutely filling the podcast sphere at the minute, and I hope you're enjoying. It seems to be a lot of love for us on all of your podcast providers, and you can see us on YouTube as well if you want to see this in visual colour to see our faces, which I'm sure, Joe, they'll be sticking to the podcast format. But we're back here to be discussing everything Manchester City at this moment in time. But first of all, Joe Bray, how are you doing, mate?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. Nice little trip over the Pennines to Yorkshire yesterday, and a very good game to boot.
God's County, mate. God's County. So obviously Sheffield United.
You can't say that on a City podcast.
God's County. Sheffield United 1, Man City 2. First of all, Joe, how was the trip? Was it a nice? It looked like a Yorkshire setting baked in sunshine yesterday.
Yeah, I don't like saying this as a Lancastrian, but as soon as we went over the border into Yorkshire, it went from horrible weather and mist and fog over the tops to glorious sunshine, and it was just a lovely day for football. Very windy inside Bramall Lane. I think it had its own climate. I was shivering at the top of that stand in the press box, and then we came out and I was boiling, and it was a lovely weather. But it was a good day for football and just a good atmosphere. Like when that stadium's packed, it's a really good one to be in. And the Sheffield United fans really got behind the team, and it made a bit of an awkward one for City, but they got through it. And it was a good win in the end.
Yeah, it sounded like a really good atmosphere. You could hear the City fans as well, really blasting out, and it sounded like it was a real good concoction of noise there. Joe, was that? Yeah, I mean, like you just said, it sounded booming on the TV. Both fans really giving it all.
Well, that's good to hear, because at the top of the main stand, obviously surrounded by all the Sheffield United fans, I couldn't hear the City fans as much. I could see them clapping their hands and singing, so I knew they were making noise, but it didn't travel up to the top. But I think when you've got those fans in that bottom tier and Sheffield United fans all the way around, it was just noisy all the way through. And when they got the equaliser, I've not heard a noise like that in quite a while. It was just a massive release of noise, and it was a really good atmosphere to be in. And it was enjoyable, because when you go to those sort of smaller 30,000 seater stadiums rather than your 40 and 50 and 60,000s, it's a different type of game, isn't it? And when you can really get behind your team, and they were getting on the referee's back, I'm not really sure how much merit that had, but they decided that the referee was the enemy on the day. Everything he did was booed. Everything that City did to try and wind them up was booed. It was it felt like a bit of a cup tie, a bit of a sort of an FA Cup feel to it, but no, it was. I mean, you look at players like Haaland and Grealish; they must love that sort of atmosphere to be in, and especially when you get a late winner at the same time, it must be even better.
Yeah, I don't know if you caught it, but you probably you wouldn't have done. But I don't know if you caught it on the highlights afterwards. But they had it in the corner towards the end, and Grealish was evidently just getting absolute pelters, and he just smiling. And then Haaland came and joined him, keeping the ball in the corner, and Haaland was smiling, and the cameras picked it up and stuff like that. And you're actually bang on. It is a City player, especially when you've got that quality in and around you to just end games. It must be brilliant to be playing in those atmospheres, because the likelihood is you're going to win.
Well, they were booing Grealish from the start, and I said to Simon, I was like, does he have history with Sheffield United, or are they just booing him because he's Jack Grealish, and we didn't get to the bottom of that? But he always seems to do better when he's got someone on his back as well. And when you see Haaland sort of keeping the ball in the corner and winning successions of corners, you almost get the sense he enjoys that just as much as scoring goals. We've seen him do it in the past in big games against Man United, for example. But he is very good at that, and he loves that aspect of the game as well.
How was the food at Bramall Lane? Did they put on a nice spread?
Bacon butties with hash browns in, which was quite nice for. We got there about 11 o'clock, so it was still a lunchtime morning. So it was not the worst I've had. A proper Yorkshire welcome.
You adding brown sauce to that or not, Joe? What are you doing with that?
Oh no, red sauce all the way.
That's a shocker. Right, let's get into the football. Mad game. Crazy game, like I thought, and we were just talking off air. It was a fantastic game, I thought, and I mean, you were just saying, Joe, and I agree as well. Like, it seemed to be criticised a lot. And I was watching Match of the Day last night, and it was quite. They weren't really enthused about it, to be quite honest with you. But City completely dominant, I thought, in that first half, and it didn't look like it was just, a Premier League apart in terms of quality, which it is. It looked like divisions apart. I mean, they couldn't touch the ball, and every time they seemed to touch the ball, Sheffield United, it was Olayed, and any time they'd get beyond the halfway line, it was Olayed, really. And it was, City were pretty convincing in that first half, weren't they?
Yeah, I don't think Sheffield United had a shot. I think their XG at half-time was 0 because they just couldn't get out of the half. And when they did, they were rushing and trying to make sure that they made it count. But Diaz read everything in that first half. And I think sometimes when City are on top and just passing it around, they're criticised for being a little bit boring, a bit slow, and nothing's happening. But they're always working. They're always just trying to work out what's happening in that defence and trying to find that way through. I think I saw a thing that Michael Richards did on Match of the Day, and he was saying that Sheffield United put 5 behind the ball on 3 in midfield. They were doubling up on Grealish. They were tripling up on Haaland and making him have to work so much harder to even get the ball when it came in the box. And City were resorted to crossing, which they're not necessarily used to, especially when they're playing 2 number 10s as they have done for the last couple of games. So I think it was just a case of trying to work it out, and City always remain calm. Sometimes they get an early goal like they did against Burnley, sometimes they don't. If they'd scored the penalty, which was thoroughly deserved on the balance of play, then they would have probably ran out 2-3-0 winners, I think, because then Sheffield United would have had to come out. But Haaland misses, the crowd gets behind the team. It just becomes a bit tetchy. And I mean, the end of the first half, when the referee stopping it for pushes and shoves and free kicks and hauling backs, and I didn't want that half to end because it was just enjoyable with all the sort of mind games going on between the sides. And when City are sort of against it a little bit, and you can see time going on, and they haven't scored, they have to find other ways to win. And it seems like at half-time, Pep Guardiola's on the phone, they changed something. I think Lillo said that they had to get through the middle more, and they had to get Bernardo and Alvarez with a bit more time to do what they had to do. He said in the first half, Bernardo and Grealish and Alvarez were getting dragged out of position to try and find the space. In the second half, City were just more relentless, kept coming, got the goal that they deserved. Grealish, I thought, did really well to stand the ball up for Haaland. He'd missed a few chances, but he was never going to miss that header. And then, it looks like City are going to get a good 1-0 away win. Doesn't happen. They've conceded the equaliser. Kyle Walker inexplicably back heels when he could just let it go out for corner or a goal kick. I don't know. Do you know what? Kyle Walker was desperate to score and desperate to be the hero in that game. He was shooting from everywhere. But yeah, I think the calmness that City showed after the game to get that winner, they kept on going. They brought Phil Foden on. It was just good game management all the way through. And I think I wrote in our blog on about the hour mark, I said, this feels like the Nottingham Forest game at the start of the year, where City are missing a few chances. Haaland's missed a sitter. They've not got everything going their way. They've only got 1 goal. The home crowd are gradually getting behind them, despite having not much of the ball. In that game, Forest got an equaliser. No more time to find a winner for City. This time, City did what they had to do, which I suppose is progress of some sort, isn't it?
It is, mate. Yeah, it is, and it's a hallmark of champions. It definitely is, and we're all used to City sort of having a slowish start, and it's been anything but so far. That momentum and consistency has just been evident, hasn't it, so far? And yeah, I agree, and it almost felt like the Arsenal game at the back end of last season, when Rodri got the winner, and it was backs against the wall there as well. But yeah, the Forest game is very, very similar to that as well. What was your take on Foden not starting? Because for me, I was quite surprised. I thought in the first half, maybe the creativity and the guile really from midfield wasn't really there. I thought it was a little bit lateral. I thought Kovacic was making those fantastic runs. I thought he was brilliant yesterday, Kovacic. He was up there with Diaz for me. But I just felt maybe that innovativeness from that central spot where Foden was picking up those spaces against Newcastle wasn't really there. I don't know if you sort of agree with that sentiment.
Yeah, it's tricky because when Foden plays as well as he did against Newcastle, it's hard to drop him. But when you've got Bernardo coming back in, he's probably a bit more natural playing in. If you're going to play the same system of 2 number 10s and Kyle Walker providing the width on the right, I think Bernardo is probably a bit more natural in that position to play in between the lines between the fullback and the centre back. He did it last season coming in off the right. So I can see why, from a tactical point of view, Bernardo started. Then it turns out that Foden had stomach problems and couldn't start the game. So it makes even more sense. yeah, it's a tricky one with Foden because he played so well. Everyone wants him to play number 10. If he doesn't start there, all the eyes are on him. But I think when he came on after the equaliser, Sheffield United were terrified of him. He wasn't quite playing in the number 10. He was playing a bit more wide, and Bernardo came inside, and the shape changed a little bit. But Foden set up a chance for Alvarez that Alvarez should have scored immediately after the goal. He's in the middle. I mean, he'll get an assist for the Rodri goal. I'm not really sure he knew too much about it with his sort of mishit shot of his own that fell into Rodri's path. But to say that he didn't start and Bernardo's back and there's just another obstacle in his way to play number 10 now, he did quite well after coming on. So it felt like a step backwards that he didn't start, and then his cameo, he was actually one of the more influential players on the pitch, even though he only played about 10 minutes in all.
I think the thing with him as well, Joe, is it's really similar to Bernardo. They just constantly want the ball. And I think that must be an absolute nightmare for a midfielder. Let's say a midfielder who's, I don't know, just tracking Phil Foden or tracking Bernardo. They're always moving. They're constantly moving towards the ball, and they're confident in any situation, any tight space, any pocket. They don't care. They just want the ball consistently. And I think that's got to be a nightmare for people up against Foden and Bernardo. And I felt like when he came on, it was just evident. I mean, the amount of touches he had in the first sort of I think it was like 2 or 3 minutes he was on, it was just like, this guy's going to make a difference.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it suited him more to come off the bench. Even if he was fully fit, I could see City have started with Bernardo for the sort of to get the shape and to pin Sheffield United back and keep things ticking. And then you can bring a player like Phil Foden on against a tired defence. That feels a bit better. We've seen Foden maybe get a little bit lost in some of these games where there's 8 or 9 men behind the ball. I'm not saying he can't do it. Newcastle put a lot of players behind the ball, and he was brilliant, and he made the goal, and he was man of the match deservedly. So I think it's just something he's got to learn. If he did have a stomach bug, that probably made the decision a bit easier. But I also quite like the system of playing Alvarez in there as well, because it just gives the defence another thing to think about. So having that dual number 10 role, I don't know what will happen when Doku comes in the side, for example, on the right, because this system with 2 number 10s relies on Kyle Walker doing everything up and down that right flank. It's not going to work against every side, but I quite like having those 2 behind Haaland. If you've not got Kevin De Bruyne who can do all of that in once, and Ilkay Gundogan was also sort of a box-to-box player at times, having 2 number 10s is quite useful for City at the moment. I can see it carrying on at least for another few weeks until the sort of squad settles down in terms of injuries and illness and signings coming in and that sort of thing.
Were you sort of disappointed that we didn't see Jeremy Doku?
Yes, I thought he would come on, but I think the game didn't need him at that time. Possibly he could have come on after the equaliser. I think, say City scored the penalty, Haaland scored the second, and it's a bit more of an open game, then it's a good one to throw Doku into. But when City need a winner or need to see out that win, it's probably not the one you want to throw a new signing into. What you want to throw him in for his debut in a game where he doesn't have to have much pressure on him. And I think Lillo said that before the game. He said he's ready, but we don't want to put the pressure on him. And he essentially said he's got to adapt to City rather than City will modify to him. So that means that he will naturally have to have a bit of learning. And on the training pitch, he's only had a couple of training sessions until that point. So I wasn't really surprised. They didn't make any subs again, they did, of course. They didn't make any subs until the equaliser, which we were saying, could they brought someone on? But it's a young bench at the moment. Foden was the most experienced player on that bench, which he's not a very experienced player. He's won a lot, and he's played a lot for a 23-year-old, but he's still only 23. So I think that just shows the options that City have at the moment. So I can see why they didn't bring Doku on, but maybe against Fulham next weekend, and the games coming up, there'll be a few cup games coming up in the autumn. I think that'll be the time that we'll see Doku.
Yeah, the only way I saw I saw a substitution at one point. Obviously, Foden came on, but the only substitution I thought at one point was Rico Lewis for Kyle Walker's head loss. I just thought he's that. As we've touched on it, mate. But I mean, he was so good after that goal as well. I mean, he made a surging run down the right, as we spoke, as we alluded to Alvarez missing, but he was key in the goal as well. But the head loss, I was watching it. I was thinking there could even be a suggestion here that Rico Lewis comes on. It was. I just don't know what he was thinking. Like I can't. Just a back heel there. It was like maybe overconfidence, Joe. I don't really know.
Well, that's the time of the game where we're writing our pieces and we're not watching the full game. Really, we're sort of looking up when we hear something. So I see Kyle Walker ushering a ball out, and I look down again, and suddenly the ball's bounced into Bogle, and he's smashed it in the back of the net. And I didn't know how it had got from Walker being in full control of the ball to Sheffield United equalising. And I looked at the replay. I couldn't believe what he'd done. And yeah, I don't think that was his wisest move, but he did have a good game, and I thought he's been quite important in that role in the last two games. As I say, providing that width, so we can probably let him off. And if he goes up the other end and plays a key role in the winner, fair enough, I think.
I think as well, I don't know if you caught this, but when the goal went in, the second, he was on obviously the byline, and he went like that to the Man City fans, as in like, sorry, I apologise.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which is quite a nice touch, to be honest, because you can tell he was desperate to make amends, Yeah. But, someone who'd also, what a segue, Joe Bray. I don't even know I'm doing it sometimes, but someone who also probably wanted to make amends. Erling Haaland, a mixed bag for him, a very odd day. He looked visibly frustrated as the halftime whistle blew, but and once again, someone with the celebration who was almost like he gave a few sign. It's like, thank God. But mixed bag for him. I thought he occupied the defenders well, got his goal, but obviously was quite unlucky with the penalty.
Yeah, I mean, you saw his celebration. He wasn't happy. He was just, thank God for that, was the message on his face, wasn't it? And people jumping on him from the crowd and City players jumping on him, but he didn't seem delighted that he'd scored that goal. But I don't think it was a bad performance. He struck his penalty well, and it's come off the inside of the post. It happens. It's not like he's skied it or he's fluffed his lines. He sent the keeper the wrong way. He's hit it well. It's just unlucky. And I think a couple of the other chances he's had, they're not far off. It's not like he's really been, his radar's been completely off. It just happened that he kept getting chances and they kept going wide. And I think Lillo said after the game, it would have been difficult for any striker because the way Sheffield United sort of manhandled him, even towards the end of that first half, he was getting really frustrated with the treatment he got. And I think he wanted a second penalty for a pull or a tug in the box. And to be fair, I think Sheffield United are one of the most effective defences against Haaland, because in the Cup semi-final last season, barely got a sniff. Yes, Riyad Mahrez went and scored a hat-trick, but they were effective in keeping Haaland quiet, and they did the same in that game. The thing with Haaland is you can only give him, half a second to take your eye off him, and he scored a goal, and that's what he did. And there's one little step he takes as Grealish is taking on his man, and that gives him the space to rise highest and head in. And that's what he does because he never gives up. And I think, Lillo said it shows, not just because he scored, he came close on other occasions. It shows his mental fortitude to keep going and going. It's really difficult to find. He's a young lad and his mindset is so good that, yes, he missed the penalty, but he kept going. And, Guardiola said similar in the past. As soon as a chance goes, he's on to the next chance and he wants to score it. And even though he had two players, within touching distance of him at all times, he still managed to get a goal. And I think he deserves credit for that, because it must have been one of the toughest afternoons he's had as a City player, I think.
We've seen it, though, in multiple times with him, haven't we? We've seen him have difficult moments and, everyone's always subjecting him to, he's not the same player as he was a game ago, or he's not the same player as he was last season. And it's just one of those things, really, where he keeps scoring. And when he keeps scoring, it doesn't mean anything. It's always funny with Messi, isn't it? Messi's out of a game. Messi's not turned up. Messi's this, Messi's that. And then he'll just turn up in a moment and produce a moment of magic. And yes, it wasn't a moment of magic from Erling Haaland, different to Messi, but he's still an out-and-out goal scorer. And, that's why it must be a nightmare for teams, Joe. Again, we're speaking about Foden and Bernardo, how that's a nightmare for teams. But Erling Haaland must just be a focus nightmare for defenders as well, like, because the concentration has to be at optimal point for 90 minutes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find. I think Paul Heckingbottom said something. He was asked, how well did you keep Haaland quiet? And he basically said, well, we did, but he scored.
Yeah,
because
doesn't matter.
They did really well to stop him and frustrate him, but he found that one chance and he still scored. So no, he's that kind of player, isn't he? How many other players across the strikers across the Premier League would miss a penalty, miss a few chances, and just get frustrated and either get substituted or just zone out and not do it? Haaland made a point of doing that and scoring that goal, and he's come away with a goal. He might not be happy with his overall performance, but he's got a goal and City have got a win, so he's got to be happy with that. It's
great for my fantasy team as well. So, bonus points there.
Needed it after that missed penalty.
Oh, shocking. Absolutely. Another horrible weekend. Horrible weekend, but we'll get into that at some point. But let's talk about Rodri, shall we? It's got to a point now where I don't really know what more to say about the game. I mean, for a defensive midfielder to be, I was saying this on a video on the channel yesterday, for him to just be a real big problem for the opposing team, even in an attacking capacity, it's very rare. Like, Rodri is such a clean striker of the ball, and when he gets into that offensive third, he's as much of a problem as a lot of City's midfield players, in an attacking capacity, and just showed it yesterday. I mean, that finish again, Joe, what a finish.
Yeah, he doesn't score normal goals, does he? And he doesn't score insignificant goals. They're always late winners, or, he smashed them in from the edge of the box. He's got 2 goals and 2 assists already this season, which is
from defensive midfield as well.
For a defensive midfielder, it's weird. We were saying he wasn't having his best game, and it's similar to the Champions League final. He wasn't having his best game, and then he pops up with a really important winner. He was saying after the game, it was quite interesting. He was saying that because Kovacic is there, he has a bit more license to go forward, and because of the 2 number 10s and Haaland and the 2 wingers, the defence were occupied, so he had a lot of space to run onto it and hit the ball. He had a few efforts where he tried to use that to his advantage and have a shot, and they were either saved or went wide or over, but he kept going, and he found that pocket and turned up on the moment when City needed it, and he does that a lot, and he is consistent, isn't he? Even when he drops slightly below his ridiculously high standards, he'll pop up with a goal and still make good of his game. And it's I don't think this is controversial to say that there's no better defensive midfielder in the league or in Europe, because it's the consistency more than anything. And if he can now add goals to his game, which he said he wants to do, he's clearly looked at Kovacic coming in and saying, yeah, this is something that I can do this season. If he can add goals like that to his game, and even if he scores 10 a season, which he's probably on track to do, he becomes even better a defensive midfielder, which is quite scary for the rest of the league.
Yeah, it is, mate. It is. What a player! Just what a player! I can't get over how good he is. And every time you watch him, I just think to myself. I mean, I think we've said it. I said it to Sai as well. Is he City's most important player? Because you feel like with De Bruyne out, they can compensate for that. They can still replace that. You look at Haaland. It wouldn't be ideal, of course it wouldn't. But maybe Alvarez could go up there. He's got an incredible amount of goal contributions for the amount of minutes he's played. With Rodri, you probably look at maybe Kovacic dropping a little bit deeper if he was to be absent from the side. But if you're going for a straight swap, it's like Calvin Phillips, it's Rico Lewis. The standard drops so far, doesn't it? Like, he's got to be. I mean, he is, for me, in my opinion, he's City's most important player.
Yeah, it's hard to argue that. And last season, we saw it even in the cup games against Championship opposition. Rodri started because Phillips wasn't up to the level and there was no one else who could play that role. And even when Haaland was getting rested, De Bruyne, all these key players, when the fixtures were 3 games a week, Rodri was playing every single time because Guardiola couldn't afford not to play him because he is so important, and he keeps City ticking. And I think it's going to be interesting this season to see how he does with someone next to him. We saw it a little bit towards the end of last season with the John Stones or the fullbacks coming in to support him in possession. But if you've now got Rodri and Kovacic basically playing as a double pivot, which a few years ago would have struck fear into City fans with the sort of Rodri-Fernandinho combination, which never seemed to work. Rodri's come on so much, the rest of the team have to allow that to work. And now you've got a player like Kovacic, who is clearly a very good player and very experienced and has sort of slotted in quite well. I think it could be an extra evolution of the midfield and of Rodri, which is quite exciting. And if he's more than just a sole defensive midfielder, he's got the talent to do it, and he's got the strike to add some goals. He can definitely do it. But I think the key this season will be resting him where possible. He can do it now because they're playing once a week. When it comes to the business end of the season, when they're playing a lot, it might need Kovacic to play a bit more in defensive midfield. Even if John Stones plays there a few times, who knows? Calvin Phillips might turn around and suddenly become a City standard player. They need to have those alternative options as the season progresses. But for now, I agree with you. Rodri's definitely the first name on the team sheet.
Yeah, 100%. Guys, we're going to leave it there for Act 1. Join us in Act 2 and we'll be talking Lilo, we'll be talking Alvarez and potentially fantasy football as well. We'll see you in a sec. Hey, hello everybody. Welcome back to the Talking City podcast. And let's just jump straight into it. Joe, Lilo didn't like Pep not being there. I think that was obvious. He seems like such a nice man, and he almost didn't want to take sort of any praise for the result. Obviously, because everything comes through Pep, doesn't it? But I guess he's the guy on the touchline. But he seemed very unassuming there, very sort of like meek and mild, and he was saying in the post-match press conference, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's almost not the same without Pep's presence there. And it was quite a nice sort of credit to Pep Guardiola, wasn't it?
Yeah, we were trying to find out how it worked with Guardiola and what his feelings were. And, I'd asked him, did you talk to Guardiola and what input did he have? And then the next question was, are you enjoying this, stepping up and being number one? And he was speaking in Spanish and it was being translated, but we all knew what nada, nada, nada meant. It was, I am not enjoying this at all. I need Pep back. He basically said Pep is irreplaceable, that sort of thing. And he seems like a lovely guy. He's very apologetic that he's not speaking in English. He's saying thank you and hello when he comes in. It would be really interesting to see him in a sort of extended role in this role, but at the same time, City need Guardiola. And he'd said before the game, hadn't he, that City are not a machine. They need someone to sort of guide them and tell them what to do. And it was Guardiola on the phone at all times and fully involved in the build up for this game. But it was Lilo on the pitch, and it struck me, we were high in the main stand directly above the dugouts. I didn't see Lilo for the first 45 minutes. He was sat in his seat, didn't come out once. There was nobody in that technical area for City, even when there was a stoppage in play for injury. Paul Heckingbottom called basically all of his outfield players over for a debrief. Normally you would see Guardiola doing exactly the same, and he'd always have something to say to his players. There was no one in the technical area. City players were just wandering around. Diaz and Walker were having a conversation among themselves about something tactically, but there was no guidance from the manager in the second half. Lilo was there. Actually, Lilo raced out for a penalty shout at the end of the first half when it was getting a bit tetchy, and that was the first we saw of him. But after the break, I don't know whether Guardiola said, listen, you need to be sort of cheerleading them on and offering guidance that way. But yeah, he was there. He was applauding them. He was, as City's intensity grew in that second half, Lilo was also there on the sidelines, and he said, yeah, Pep was in constant communication. But when there was a stoppage in the second half, everyone was over and Lilo did what Pep does and was telling them what to do. I thought that was just an interesting side note of a reminder that he is often the one at the side, the calming influence, the assistant rather than the leader. And I think he was trying to play that role in the first half, just trying to keep it steady and keep it as everything normally goes to minimise the disruption. But maybe they needed someone on the sidelines like Pep. They're used to someone, right on the case and telling them what they've done wrong, telling them what they need to do. And in the second half, they did that. And I don't think it's a surprise that the performance was a bit better. But yeah, no, he said after the game, he didn't want to sit in Pep's seat because Pep's still the boss. He only sat there because there wasn't enough space, and he's he's an interesting character, and we'll get to hear more from him on Friday. But you can see just in the little glimpses we've had why Pep Guardiola likes having him there, because he's completely different. He is the opposite to Guardiola, and sometimes that's, I think, what the intensity of Guardiola needs is someone just to calm him down and look at the bigger picture. And I think Lillo did that, but you could see during the game that he had to sort of adapt and be like, okay, we still need a Guardiola presence on the sideline. So I don't think he'll be taking over Pep anytime soon, but from the outside, he did a decent job in keeping things ticking on Sunday.
I guess that's why you have your on-field leaders, isn't it? You're talking about Diaz, you're talking about Walker, there's Rodri conducting everything as well. And that's why it's so important, because in these very niche moments, these players on the pitch, I mean, there's obviously Pep who's on the sidelines who's screaming orders at them if they're doing stuff wrong, but ultimately play is dictated by the players on the pitch and the mentality on the pitch, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's another thing that he was sort of asked about, that the system and the players essentially know what they're doing. And I think we saw that, especially first half, without much sort of cheerleading from the side. City had to sort of do that themselves and work out the spaces, and they weren't getting much instructions to tweak things, not obviously anyway. In the second half they were, and it was probably a bit of a backup of what Lillo said, which is they do need someone to guide them and tell them what to do. But when you've got players like Walker, Diaz, Rodri, like you say, all these players who've played that system for a long time, they can see those things, surely. And you could see the team working it out as they went and just carried on working the spaces and moving the defence from side to side. So as much as they do need someone to tell them what to do, there is a degree of sort of an inbuilt knowledge of exactly what Guardiola wants, even when he's 1,000 miles away in Barcelona.
Yeah, we touched on it a little bit earlier on, and you were mentioning the number 10s. Alvarez, I think you've put on. We've spoken a little bit. I think you're of the mindset that he did quite well. I don't know. I'm still not 100% convinced on him there. I don't know what it is. It feels like there's just a little bit of a spark missing. He's a grafter, isn't he? But I just wonder if that is the position for him. I don't know. I don't know if he just needs to be a bit further forward. I'm not sure. But you seem to think he did pretty well yesterday.
Yeah, I don't think he was perfect. He missed that chance, obviously, which you need to be scoring, or at least getting on target when you've got someone like Haaland in front of you. In an ideal world, he's the main striker, and he's done quite well when he plays that sort of lone striker role. But he's never going to displace Erling Haaland, because Haaland scores more goals than him and is crucial to how City play. I think in that context, having Alvarez, as a number 10 has been quite useful. It's quite revealing that whenever Kevin De Bruyne was out last season, Alvarez was the first one that was picked. It wasn't Foden, it wasn't Bernardo, it wasn't Gundogan doing that role. It was Alvarez playing behind Haaland, because just having him in those pockets behind, just in front of the defenders, just gives them something else to think about. And he's always moving. He's picking the ball up in various places. I think as his year at City has gone on, he's learned a lot of how Grealish plays, for example. He works quite well with him. He's working with the wingers. His relationship with Haaland is quite good. He started every single game this season, and he's maybe not scored as many goals. He scored the winner against Newcastle, for example. He would have had an assist, if you like, if Haaland had scored that penalty. I think he's an absolute nuisance for defenders, and I quite like him. I think it helps him as well as it helps Foden and Bernardo to have them as a sort of dual number 10, because it's just another player to play with in those short passes and moving and keeping the defenders guessing. So everyone was talking about how good Foden was against Newcastle. It wouldn't have happened for me if Alvarez wasn't there as well, doing the dirty work and offering him the pass all the time and making those runs to free the space up. And he did that for Bernardo. I think Lillo said after the game that freeing up Alvarez in that second half and stopping them from moving around positions was the key to getting that goal and getting on top. So yeah, not the perfect game. There's a couple of times where he gave the ball away or he made the wrong pass. There were also a couple of times where he's come deep and he's laid the ball off to Kovacic and opened up the space, which you want your number 10 to do. So I think it's a very encouraging start to the season for him, and it's quite telling that he started every game. Grealish didn't start the first game. Foden didn't start a couple of games. Bernardo's not been there, but Bernardo hasn't started it either. We're talking about Foden as a number 10, but it seems like Alvarez is first choice at the moment, and he's done that quite quietly. And I think he does the work for the team that might not result in the fancy things that you see on Match of the Day, but I think I can see why the coaches really like him. Saying that, he'll probably get benched on Saturday, and Foden will return, and it'll be Foden and Bernardo in number 10. But no, I really like Alvarez. I've always thought he's been a hard worker and does the dirty work. And like you say, his goals figures are really good for the fact that he's always coming off the bench or he's not playing in his proper position.
Yeah, and we've seen that dirty work being attributed to Grealish's game as well, haven't we? And I think that's the reason Grealish is starting most weeks. And obviously, we saw the season before last that he was really, really struggling. And maybe it's because he didn't have that, not like he didn't have the work ethic, but he didn't have the Pep Guardiola work ethic, which just seems to be at an insane standard. And once again, it's not to say Foden doesn't have that, but it just feels like Alvarez has. It's nailed with Alvarez, isn't it? And maybe Foden's still a little bit not on Pep's right wavelength when it comes to, I don't know, maybe work rate and stuff like that. It feels a little bit like that because on ability, there's not much between them, is there?
No, I think Foden's got more of a spark. I think Foden's someone who can change a game on his own. But I think over the course of a few games, I think Alvarez might be the one you want. I quite like both of them together. I think if that's a tactic that continues for a few weeks, I think both of them will score a lot of goals and create a lot of chances for Haaland. I think Haaland enjoys having them both there because the defenders have something else to think about rather than just marking him, or the defensive midfielders do, and that frees up someone like Rodri to create space. What Alvarez does is he creates space for others, which is very important in the City side as well. So I don't think it's a negative shout on Foden that Alvarez is starting. I just think it's Alvarez is probably doing what the coaches want a little bit more rather than Foden. We've seen it with players like Bernardo when he's not necessarily had the headline stats to shout about, but he's been doing that work. Grealish hasn't always returned the goals and assists that especially fans have wanted, but he's done that hard work, like you say, for a long time and helps keep the pressure on defences. And maybe that's what Alvarez's role is going to be this season.
Definitely. And like I've just mentioned as well, that the balance in that midfield between Rodri and Kovacic seems to be perfect, doesn't it? I mean, you probably got this from other podcasts, but I absolutely love Kovacic. And I think his game looks to be evolved already. He looks to, I don't know, like I've said in Society, like he seemed to be a bit of a, he was asked at Chelsea a lot, in my opinion, to defend a lot. And I think you can utilise a lot of his abilities driving in the midfield. And I think we saw that in the first half, in particular. He won a free kick on the edge of the box. And he just marched through that midfield. And his progressive ability on the ball is very, very good and quite underrated. And yeah, we've seen a different side to him at City from what we saw at Chelsea. But it seems to be working so far, doesn't it, Joe?
Yeah, he's not had a bad game yet. I think you've said that you're not too keen on Alvarez in that role, and I've said I am. I'm not fully convinced on Kovacic yet. As I say, he's not had a bad game, but he doesn't quite look like everything's happening naturally to him. It's like he's having to think about what he's got to do every time. Luckily, he's a very, very good player, so he often makes the right choice. I think some of his runs from deep into sort of the edge of the area positions, we've not really seen that from a City player in the last few years. So that's something new, and it's giving people different things to think about. I think he's only getting better as well. Every game he's getting better. He was the one who found Foden in space against Newcastle, which created the goal. He's working well with other players. And Rodri said after the game that because he's got Kovacic next to him, Rodri can go forward again. So he's changing the midfield. He's creating different options, and I don't think he's a bad player, and he's had a bad start at all. You get the feeling he can get better, I think is what I'm trying to say, and that's quite exciting because once he fully clicks into the City mindset and everything's second nature to him, I think it's going to be like a player who's been there for years, and that's what you want from a new signing. We're looking at Gvardiol and Doku, who probably need a bit more time to adapt. I don't think Kovacic will need that time. He's good enough as he is to make an impact the way he's playing, and then as he slowly adapts to the sort of demands of and the intricacies of Guardiola's system, I think he can get even better. So yeah, he's done very well, but something feels like it's not quite there at the moment. But to say that it's not quite there and he's doing well can only mean good things for City.
Yeah, I think it's an extra touch. I think it's an extra touch where there doesn't need to be an extra touch. And I think what you get from Rodri and what you get from De Bruyne is in any single passage of play, obviously in possession, they seem to know without looking where each and everybody is on that pitch, especially the wingers. And I think, it's those sequences and those patterns of play, isn't it, that with over time is going to develop. But like you just said, Joe, I mean, if he's taking that extra touch now and still looking very good, then it's not a bad indictment.
Yeah, no, I think he was always a good player at Chelsea, but maybe he fell under the radar because of a few more flashy players, or Chelsea just weren't having the best of times in the last couple of seasons. But there's a reason he's got, 4 Champions Leagues under his belt? He's a winner. He's a good player, and he's played for some of the biggest clubs in Europe, and he seems to fit in different systems, and you can see that sort of football brain is there. And a few people might have questioned why City signed him, but he's looking a very good buy at 25 million, especially when the going rate for a midfielder in that position is 100 million at the moment.
It is indeed. Guys, we're going to leave it there. We're going to be back with Act 3 in just a moment, where we promise we will talk about fantasy football towards the back end of it. We're going to be talking transfers, ins and outs at Manchester City as well. Don't go anywhere. We'll see you in a bit. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Talking City podcast. Joe Bray, transfers. What can you tell us?
I can tell you it's the deadline on Friday, so whatever City want to do has to be done by Friday. It seems like they still want a midfielder. Gary O'Neill at Wolves confirmed that City had a bid rejected for Matheus Nunes. Reports of another bid going in. It seems like City still want that extra body in midfield. We've been talking about the options and how the midfield is changing. It could be that they want to add another player, maybe another defensive-minded player. I mean, Nunes can do the defensive and the attacking, but I would say he's a little bit more of a sort of player that you would have around the Rodri and Kovacic role rather than further up in behind Haaland. If he signs, then City have to do that quickly. I think the week will be more about...
Joe, do you like that as a signing or not? It seems it's a bit of an unusual one, isn't it?
Well, we know Pep likes him. When they played Sporting in the Champions League, he made a point of saying this is a very good player and he doesn't always do that. He then went to Wolves, so I think the sort of attention on him from a City perspective may have died down a bit. I genuinely don't know, but as I said before, I wasn't too sure on Kovacic, and he's fit in. I think they probably do need another body. It seems like they're not too convinced with Calvin Phillips even after a pre-season. So if they want just an extra body, they're only one injury away from another sort of injury crisis in midfield. So I can see why. I think it's going to have to be one of those in Pep we trust transfers, because it feels a bit of a reactive signing. It doesn't feel like they went out to get him at the start of the summer. But listen, last season we didn't think Manu Akanji was going to sign, and this time last year he came in for a good fee and turned out to be a key player in the treble side. So it could be maybe a questionable signing on paper, or a signing that doesn't fully compete or fit into that City side from sort of an immediate look. But City are a team, and Guardiola is a manager who can make new signings work, and I think that's the category it would fit into if it did.
Yeah, definitely. Rumours were circulating last week about Eberechi Eze. I was definitely getting a bit excited for that in a Man City system. I think Eze is a fantastic player, but Nunes is Yeah, it's an interesting one, a really interesting one, that one. And like you say, if he's liked him before, which, Pep sort of said, hasn't he? Like you just quite rightly said then, you got to trust in that, haven't you? And Kovacic is a really good example. Akanji is a brilliant example, of course. And just Pep, we trust, I guess. I mean, are you thinking about, we just spoke about Nunes there, and you mentioned this player, but in a central midfield capacity, are you thinking exit-wise there could be any more? Are we talking Calvin Phillips? What's your prediction for the remainder of the window?
I think Phillips will be an interesting one because he's not played yet this season. It seems like there's been no progress, and Kovacic has come in straight away and looks fairly at home in that City midfield. We touched on his pros and cons, but he started every game and hasn't looked bad at all. Phillips has now had a year and still doesn't look at home. And if we're putting a slight question mark on Kovacic for taking that extra touch, then Phillips is still getting the ball, looking around, and doesn't know where to pass it. And you would expect more from someone who's been at the club for a year. Like this time last year, Grealish was in his second season and was starting to look a little bit better and like he'd really kicked on. We've not had the chance to see Phillips do that. So he said he wants to fight for his place. He's made it clear that he wants to be a City player. So unless that stands to change, then I'm not too sure if he'll move on. I think it'll be more young players. Taylor Howard-Bellis and Tommy Doyle both won promotion from the Championship last year, both won the under-21 Euros, and both are sort of in a bit of limbo at the moment. They're not in the City squad. They've not really got any loan moves or permanent transfers potentially lined up. You would expect that both of them would need a club this season, so they might be ones to look out for. And then you've got Cole Palmer, James McAtee. Played a lot in pre-season. Palmer's scored in the Super Cup, but there are question marks over will they get enough minutes this season, and will they look for either a loan move or a permanent move. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a busy week. In the last few years, we've not really sort of seen much activity in towards the end of the transfer windows. Last year, we saw Akanji and Sergio Gomez arrive. I think this year will be maybe a bit of work in the offices at City to make something happen and just perfect that squad and just get it right after a summer that's been a bit more unpredictable than previous years.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's going to be, and it's actually going to be a lot of movement. But in fact, if you're just predicting it, with especially with the low moves, like you just said, Cole Palmer, you feel like his career needs to kick on at some point now. I know he's mentioned stick it like wanting to play. McAtee as well. He was just so good for Sheffield United. You can't have, me and Si were talking about this, you can't really have another year on the bench where you're maybe going to feature once or twice in cup games. I think that when you've done a James McAtee and a Tommy Doyle and you've had good seasons, similar to like Callum Doyle, who's gone obviously on loan to Leicester City. It's like you need that continuous development. And Taylor Howard-Bellis is another one. It's like brilliant season at Burnley. Let's continue that development. It's like it feels like if you just, I understand the experience thing, of course, that who've been on the bench, been with the City lads, and obviously getting that with like Oscar Bob. But it just feels like they need that kick on now, don't they?
Yeah, and I think they'll be looking at sort of former academy teammates who are getting regular games. Romeo Lavia spent a year at Southampton and now he's a £60 million Chelsea player. You only take one good move and then you get a really good move. And I'm a little bit shocked that no one's come in for these players, because Howard-Bellis has just helped Burnley to the Championship title. He's captained England to the Euros. And we've not heard his name at all. He's a very good young English centre-back. Surely there's a market out there for him. And you also think that a club would be able to spend 10, 15 million on him and then make a lot of money on him, similar to Tommy Doyle. He's helped Sheffield United get promoted. Doesn't seem to have been much sort of a fight for him, but I've always thought he'd be a very good top-end Championship, lower-end Premier League player in that midfield. And it'll be interesting to see what happens, because I think staying at City when they're not going to get games would be a bit of a sort of a step back for them after really, really good years. So I think for them and their futures, it will be interesting to see what happens in the last week of the window.
Definitely. Joe Bray, if I was to say Thursday the 31st of August, I should say to you, the Grimaldi Forum in Monaco, what would you say?
I would say, what are you talking about?
And I would respond and say the Champions League draw. Champions League draw, obviously, it begins again. The reigning champions, Manchester City, obviously are going to figure out their fate on this day. We've got down on the show notes best and worst scenarios. Is it pretty obvious what the best and worst scenarios are, Joe, or is there sort of like some differentials in there this year?
Well, what I did is I suggested that talking point and then didn't look at what the best and worst scenarios would be. I'm looking at that pot 2. So City obviously as winners, the pot 1. I'm looking at pot 2. They could face Real Madrid, Inter Milan, Dortmund, Atletico Madrid, Leipzig, or Porto. So you're looking at Leipzig and Porto as a team you want to face there, rather than Real Madrid, Inter Milan, Dortmund, for example. It'd be interesting for Inter Milan again after the Champions League final. It was a very close game, and that would be just to see how both teams would approach that in a sort of group stage setting rather than a final, because Inter did cause City a lot of problems. Pot 3 could be AC Milan, could be Lazio, Red Star, Red Bull Salzburg, Shakhtar. City fans will say it's guaranteed to be Shakhtar because they always play Shakhtar. I think as long as you avoid Milan and Lazio from there, then you're doing all right. Maybe Red Star Belgrade would be a bit of a difficult one to go to, just with the atmosphere, and it's not going to be a simple trip to play a team like that, is it? And then
I think pot 4 looks quite tasty.
Yeah, Union Berlin I think would be a good away day for City fans. Celtic would be an interesting one as well, an all British one. Sociedad, it's a shame they've not got David Silva anymore, but they're a very good side. And then it just depends who comes in from the qualifiers, and they're all fairly finely poised from the first leg. Rangers 2-2, they could be in there as well. So, and one of the Old Firm could be an interesting one.
Yeah, bringing about 40,000 fans down to the Etihad, that should be interesting. Seen that before. So I think there's definitely some favourable ones there. But yeah, City are going to be obviously the favourites, and City are going to be the nightmare draw for absolutely everyone, which is obviously a great position to be in. But we'll end it on some fantasy football, Joe. How's your team done this week?
I don't want to talk about it. I know it's a podcast, and well, I needed 2 players to save me after a bad week, and one was Trent Alexander-Arnold, who got booked in the first few minutes, and the other one was Luis Diaz, who got hooked after Van Dijk got sent off. So I captained Haaland, so he got his goal, but it wasn't perfect. It's just been, I think I've got the average score every week, so not too good, not too bad.
Do you know who got my highest score this week? And I brought him in just because I thought to myself, it'll be a good little addition. Chelsea backline. Gusto at 4 million quid got me 14 points this week. The rest, I think I'm averaging at 3 points really across the entire squad. Like McAllister's a bad buy. I might have to transfer him out. Everyone's getting injured. Botman went off. Akanji not in the squad. Bailey apparently didn't even feature after scoring twice last week. Shocking, absolutely shocking week. So yeah, how many points did you get? I'm going to challenge you.
I'll have a look again. Should have prepared this.
Was it anything above 45?
No, not at all. I saw John Stones was injured, and I thought, right, I'll get rid of him before his price drops. And I bought Akanji in because Akanji's been playing in that position and going forward. And then Akanji's ill and misses the game completely. And 35 I got.
Shocker. I'm going to have to much better week needed for both of us next week. I think I can't even come on here and boast. It's been a shocker. But guys, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. We're absolutely, there's content flying out from us at the minute. If you want to check out our YouTube channel, please do so you can see mine and Joe's tired faces on this Talking City podcast, and you can see everything in living colour, quoting Dan Murphy. Make sure you're liking us and rating us on all of your favourite podcast providers. It's been a pleasure. We will see you very soon, and we'll see you in a bit. Cheers.